Robert Eggers' Nosferatu is the atmospheric equivalent of going for an evening run in the woods, when suddenly you hear padding footsteps some distance behind you. You consider, should you look behind you and risk losing your footing, sending you careening to the forest floor? Or should you ignore it and hope that it's just another person, and not something that'll freaking get you? Now, if you did turn around, you would see this guy. And you know this guy is gonna eat your ass. I mean, he's gonna suck you dry. I mean, he's a vampire. You may tangentially know of Nosferatu from some clips or from that one SpongeBob episode, but it is a storied film that holds a lot of weight in the horror genre, and we're lucky we got to see it based on how the initial production went. It started as a German adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula by F.W. Murnau's Prana Films production company, back when Dracula still had copyright protection. The thing is that nobody at Prana Films decided to ask for the rights. Instead, the writer, Henrik Galeen, decided to change some names and plot points and hoped that that would work. It didn't, seeing as the Berlin premiere had a program that stated it was a direct adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Florence Stoker, Bram Stoker's widow, decided to sue their asses, but the company went bankrupt before any judgments could even begin. In fact, every company that purchased Prana Films also went insolvent. So instead, the judgment was that every copy should be destroyed. Now, it was the 20s and a different country, so they couldn't entirely enforce that. In fact, some reels were already sent to the US and UK, and when it released there, it was lauded for its use of practical effects, its narrative themes, and introducing those markets to German Impressionism. So let me get into the specifics of the plot a little bit. While it is a direct adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula, it does deviate quite a bit, and in my opinion creates a totally different sense of the work. It starts with Thomas Hutter, a real estate agent, being sent by his boss Herr Knock to sell a castle to a Transylvanian count named Orlok. Thomas has just been married to his wife Ellen, and she really does not want him to go. However, Thomas is on that hustle grind set, and he's going to make some money, so he goes straight to Transylvania. Now, upon arriving in Transylvania, all the locals are like, do not fuck with Orlok, he is a Dracula, that is no good. However, Thomas does not speak Romanian, and ignores them. One of the locals tries to help still by giving him a book and a cross pendant, but again, Thomas does not read, so he ignores that as well. Once he arrives at the castle, Orlok is already a kind of a creep, but Thomas ignores that because, again, money on his mind. Until dinner, where Thomas cuts himself while eating, and Orlok rushes over to suck the blood from his thumb. Now, he lets that slide because he just wants to get those signatures, but he's a little wary at this point. The next day, Thomas wakes up to huge bites on his neck, but he chalks that up to Transylvanian mosquitoes and tries to get those signatures finally. Luckily, Orlok does sign the documents that day, and after signing, notes a portrait of Ellen that Thomas keeps, and says some weird shit about her neck. That finally gets Thomas to want to read a book, and learns that this guy is definitely a Dracula. Now, upon realizing this fact, he also realizes that he has no options to stop Orlok, and instead uses the classic maneuver of hiding under the covers. Orlok shows up and is about to get Thomas's ass, but somehow, all the way in Visborg, Ellen sees this in her dreams, and begins sleepwalking towards the balcony. A friend of Thomas's, who she's staying with, notices her walking towards the railing and calls for a doctor. A doctor does what you're supposed to do with women at that time, and starts shaking her awake. But in the meantime, she manages to slip out the word Thomas, and that echoes all the way across to Transylvania, which Orlok hears and manages to keep him at bay for now. The next day, Thomas, who is alive simply through sheer luck, tries to find Orlok and kill him, but manages to be a coward and lets him escape. Orlok gets on a boat and disappears, leaving Thomas trapped in the castle. Of course, Thomas is God's favorite soldier and manages to escape the castle and get on a boat to get his way home as well. Once Orlok arrives in Visborg, having sustained himself on the sailors of his ship, he sets up shop in his new castle, which just so happens to be across the street from the Hutter residence. Thomas manages to get home, and his friends and wife are all freaking out because people are dying in the streets and no one really knows what to do. Ellen, being a peculiar woman, decides to read, and learns that a beautiful woman can distract the vampire by offering her blood of her own free will. She knows that Thomas is simply a liability and feigns being sick so that he'll go get the doctor. In the meantime, she beckons Orlok to come to her home and offers herself to him. While he's sucking her blood, she manages to entrance him for so long that the dawn breaks and causes him to disintegrate. Side note, this is actually the first vampire work to have sunlight be directly fatal to vampires. Even the original story, Vlad Dracula is only weakened by sunlight instead of being directly defeated by it. There are a few differences in the new film which fill out a lot of the characters and give a lot more weight to the themes. Dr. Bulwer, whose entire character is shaking Ellen, has been replaced by Professor von Franz, an occultist with a minor understanding of mythical beings. Thomas's friend, Frederick Harding, who has been calling the doctors who have been shaking her, is given a lot more plot. He's constantly at odds with Ellen's fears, seeing them as hysteria as opposed to anything rational. As the plot progresses and the grip of Orlok tightens over the city, he loses his faith and ends up succumbing to the despair as his family is ripped from him. Eric Knock is basically Orlok's Renfield, and he's set up Hutter to bring his master to Visburg. He gets put in a mental asylum and is seen by Dr. Sievers, but ends up escaping and preparing the castle for Orlok's arrival. The biggest change is that Ellen already has a prior attachment to Orlok due to a deal that she made when she was younger. This deal is renewed again when Orlok signs a document with Thomas, which is actually a contract for Ellen's soul. Orlok explains that this deal is still contingent upon Ellen willingly submitting herself to him. However, if she does not agree within 3 days, he will kill Thomas and destroy Visburg through this plague. The original, by necessity, made use of traditional visual effects, like stop motion to lift a coffin lid, slow and fast motion to allow for Orlok's inhuman movements, and a double exposure effect for his final demise, which allows him to fade away as the sun rises. Remarkably, much of Egger's work is a revitalization of the original, keeping a lot of its themes while contemporizing production and making use of newer practical effects. It adds a lot of little details and thematic elements to emphasize the narrative as a whole. For example, instead of CGI snow, they use potato flakes. Usually they would use something called a snow candle, which is a chemical mixture that, when lit, creates a powder that resembles snow. The issue was that that was recently found to be toxic, so instead, again, potato flakes were used. In fact, so much snow was needed that the entire supply of potato flakes were apparently used for the film. Speaking of large quantities of things, all the plague rats are played by real, trained rat actors, over 5,000 of them in fact. Willem Dafoe has been noted as saying that they were his favorite co-stars. There are a couple of scenes that I wanted to highlight. The first is the scene where Thomas arrives in Transylvania. This scene involves over 200 performers, musicians, dancers, and actors from all across Europe, Romania, Hungary, Czechia, and beyond. These actors are all coordinated and choreographed in this one-take scene with no cuts to create this effect of Thomas being swept into this unknown land, adding to the delirium and disorientation that Transylvania will bring him. The second is when Thomas arrives at Orlok's castle. He goes straight from being sat in the carriage to being stood up and facing the door. This is done practically. The carriage is physically pulled apart by stagehands, and a contraption spins Nicholas Hoult, who plays Thomas Hutter, from sitting to standing and facing the gates. Before I get into the plot differences, I want to talk about the cast, because they all do phenomenal work in bringing this film to life. As I mentioned before, Nicholas Hoult plays Thomas Hutter, Lily Rose Depp plays Ellen Hutter, Aaron Taylor Johnson plays Frederick Harding, Ralph Ineson plays Dr. Sievers, Willem Dafoe plays Professor von Franz, and it's an impeccable performance. And speaking of impeccable performances, Bill Skarsgård plays Count Orlok. To bring Orlok to life, Skarsgård went through vocal training and used Mongolian throat singing techniques to craft Orlok's demonic voices. He also worked with Robert Eggers to recreate the Dacian dialect, which is what Orlok would originally speak as a count in that time. All these details add up to create the chilling atmosphere that I mentioned initially, which resonate with the themes as a whole. Now, Eggers is no stranger to atmospheric horror. He directed The Witch, The Lighthouse, and The Northman prior to this film, all of which have this severe sense of, oh geez, what the fuck is going on? Notably, nature is the primary avenue through which horror occurs in these films. In The Witch, the magic and machinations of the eponymous witch don't follow logic. It lives in the shadows and the crops and the farm animals, which end up terrorizing the family who trusted them. In the lighthouse, the sea, the wind, the seabirds act as antagonists in direct opposition to Ephraim's basic attempts at survival. Nosferatu is a beast only known in legends and uses shadows and rats, these aspects of nature that we forget, which he takes advantage of to infiltrate Visborg. And The Northman, I haven't seen, but it seems pretty spooky, so there's that. One of my favorite parts of the new Nosferatu is how instead of calling for a doctor, Thomas joins Sievers and von Franz in an attempt to raid Orlok's castle and kill the bastard where he sleeps. The boys storm the castle and end up killing Erich Knock, who is staying in Orlok's coffin. Afterwards, Thomas basically turns to von Franz is like, what the fuck, I thought we had this guy. And von Franz says, straight up, if it was up to me, I'd have no idea what to do. You're lucky your wife listened to that book. The reason I love this so much is because this guy, von Franz, that everybody, including the audience, has been relying on, who seemed to have some idea of what to do, admits, I don't know how to stop this. All I know is this will ruin us. Much like how a seismologist can't stop an earthquake or a meteorologist can't stop a hurricane, this man is just that, a man in the face of nature that has turned its wrath against us. This ties into the secondary theme, sacrifice, but more specifically, not pushing things aside in the hopes that a more easy solution will present itself. Throughout the movie, characters make decisions that are based on the logic that this can't be that bad, and I'll just do what I've done before, it'll work out. The push and pull of action versus inaction is a constant in the film and ends up being a major aspect of the work. Thomas goes to Transylvania despite pleas from his wife not to, thinking it's an easy deal and she's just scared. Dr. Sievers underestimates Erich Knock in the mental asylum, saying he's just a crazy guy and instead allows him to bring Orlok to Visborg. Harding tries to restrain Ellen and disregards von Franz's ideas, thinking magic is nonsense and his family will be fine once Ellen's taken care of. Ellen makes the decision to sacrifice herself, with the added weight of knowing that she is the cause of this. She's seen enough people die because of her, and she isn't going to let it keep happening just because she's scared. She could have let the guys kill Orlok in the castle, because who knows, that could have worked. But unlike everyone else in the movie, she knew the risk was not worth it. As the sun rises on Ellen and Orlok, and Thomas barely makes it back in time to see his wife die, we look out into the city. The plague isn't gone, just the source. There's still wreckage and chaos and much work to be done, but this chapter has been sealed thanks to Ellen's choice. What I find really interesting about this is sacrifice is often a theme we see in hero works, where someone like Spider-Man or Batman has to give up a part of themselves or put themselves in grave danger in order to save others. This is a story about a woman who is basically helpless in a time when women were seen as helpless. But she makes the hard choice. She gives up her entire self in order to save those that she cares about and do what needs to be done. It's very nice to see this in a horror film especially, which are predicated on ideas of people being in distress and making bad choices in the hopes of survival. Seeing someone take action in a situation like this, especially when everyone around her is being inactive, really adds to the weight of the choice that she makes. Now, as you can probably tell, I really did like this movie. It's been a while since I've seen a good, straight-up vampire film, and this really hits it out of the park. I still think I like The Lighthouse more overall when it comes to Eggers films, but they're different genres, really. Lighthouse is more surreal, disconcerting, and focuses on obsession as part of its themes. Nosferatu is more, there's a Dracula, what are we doing about it? If you haven't seen it and don't mind knowing the entire plot, I still do highly recommend watching this film. I talked a lot about details that build up this movie, but there's so many little things that I just don't have the time to cover. Just going over it again for this video, I keep thinking of little aspects of production, audio and visuals, and themes that make it so haunting. If you have seen it, let me know what you thought, especially compared to Eggers' other works. I'd love to know what other people thought of this movie, seeing as most people haven't seen the original. Also let me know what you thought of the video itself. I have some ideas for more content, so any thoughts you have to help me make it better is definitely appreciated. Hopefully I'll see you again when I get around to those.